The following is a conversation with Atlanta Athletic Club's historian and past president, Bill O'Callahan, followed by a tour of the rich history held at the Atlanta Athletic Club. Thanks for joining us today. I've got the distinct privilege to have Bill O'Callahan with us. Bill is the Atlanta Athletic Club's historian, but after 50 years of being a member here, your involvement at the club extends far greater than that, including being a past president of the club. So thanks so much for being able to bring to life some of what's gone on over the years here, and also what we'll get a chance to see and observe in the clubhouse as we go through a tour toward the end of this discussion.
My pleasure. I joined the Atlanta Athletic Club in 1969, so I've been a member over 45 years. It's interesting, growing up, my parents were charter members of another club here in Atlanta. And when I left to go away in the Army, I could have joined that club for $300, but the monthly dues were going to be $25, and I didn't think I could afford that. When I came back to Atlanta, my offices were downtown. The club had a wonderful building downtown. And I was aware of the Bob Jones connection, so it was an easy decision to join.
And were you a fastidious practicer, and how did you develop your skills for golf? Did it just simply transfer from being skilled at baseball? I
don't know that I had formal lessons until after all that. I had the good fortune in 1980 to participate in a trip commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Jones Grand Slam. Members of the four clubs where he won in 1930 and the Athletic Club, which was his home club, traveled together for 19 days.
Boy, that's something.
I had a very strong grip then, and I played well on the trip. A couple of things happened. It was the pattern at each of the host clubs, and we started overseas, for the captain or president of the host club to make some welcoming remarks, and then a representative of each of the visiting clubs would reply. Well, when we got to Interlochen, outside Minneapolis, it was my turn to represent the athletic club, and to that point, the talks had been humorous, and I wasn't much more I could say, so I decided to talk about the game of golf and Bobby Jones. And it just happened that the members of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club who were on that trip took a liking to me because of that. It was purely accidental, but it led eventually to my becoming a member of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club. And the head pro at Interlochen, Bill Kidd, was the grandson of Willie Kidd, who had won a British Open and was the golf pro at Montefiore near St. Andrews. And as a parting recommendation, he said, work on your grip. So from there, and then getting some lessons, I became a better golfer.
What is it about golf that you find so appealing?
I think two things. You've got golf courses that are pretty, that are beautiful, and you've got golf courses that aren't very pretty, but strategic. And then you've got the factor that you hit the ball in the woods and you go find it and hit it out. A tennis player, if you hit the ball into the net or you hit it over the baseline, somebody goes and picks up the ball and you start over. Well, golf, there's no quitting. You go play with what you've got. In fact, some of the most interesting and fun shots in golf are the trouble shots. And Bob Jones himself said he never hit more than 5 or 6 shots in a round of golf exactly as he intended. Well, he didn't say this, but part of what he could have said is, well, you better learn to manage your mishits.
That's well said.
And he was certainly good at that.
How do you think Bobby Jones would view the lift, clean, in place that's become somewhat prevalent on the PGA and professional tours with inclement weather as it relates to playing it as it lies, which certainly was a tenet of his.
Well, I think you go back one step before that and you say, well, what do you think about the way we condition our golf courses today? Because most golf courses didn't have watering systems, and the ground was hard and you got a lot of run out, and so playing it as it lies is kind of a natural thing to do. That was just the thing to do. Now I don't know. I think it's a mistake for golf to have gone in the direction it's gone. Maybe we need to water in places like the South, but we don't need to water as much as we water. And the course conditions should be firm, and there should be some run out.
And we had that, of course, this year at the U.S. Open at Pinehurst No. 2, where the amount of water placed on that golf course was considerably less than traditional U.S. Open golf courses.
Well, and you think of the speed on the greens. I don't know that they had a stimp meter in 1930. I'm told that the loft on Calamity Jane was 11 degrees. And the loft on most of today's putters is 4 or 5 degrees. And it's still true if you play golf overseas, the greens might run at 10 if they're really fast. But here, I don't know why we need to have greens that run at 13 on the stimp meter.
I understand you're also a member at Royal Troon.
True.
So you're a member at the Royal and Ancient and at Royal Troon. So you have a real sense for how the game is played over there, the spirit of the game over there. What do you think we miss that they have as it relates to that spirit here in the United States?
Well, first, I can imagine the odd round of golf where one would play by himself and have a good time. But generally speaking, it's about the people. And I think maybe the people playing golf over there have more fun playing the game of golf. Maybe we're too serious about it over here. And there's a little bit of two sides of the coin there, because on the one hand we're serious about it over here, but we often don't try to work to improve our game. And over there, if they get you 2 down, they're going to work hard to get you 3 down. I mean, there is no letting up. But the thing about golf over there is you have to learn to manufacture shots. And that's what makes it fun. I've actually seen somebody putt a ball from 150 yards. Well, if you've got 150 yards here, maybe you hit a 7, 8, or 9 iron high in the air, hoping it will land softly by the flag. And over there, it's a ground game.
Right.
So there's worlds of difference between how you play the game over there versus how you play the game over here.
And the conditions with the weather, in particular the wind, and of course that lashing rain that can be part of it as well, certainly tests the player to be creative there.
Yeah, I say there's a rule of 3s. You've got the temperature, you've got the wind, and you've got moisture. I can handle 2 out of the 3.
That's a good point. Now I know that, speaking of the Royal and Ancient and the town of St. Andrews, it also has a very significant university there. And we have some significant universities here. And there's an exchange that goes on between these schools, and you participate in that. So help us understand this exchange scholarship program and the scholarship program that is endowed here.
Well, the University of St. Andrews is the 3rd oldest university in the world, right behind Oxford and Cambridge. And Jones said that he could take out of his life all of his experiences except those at St. Andrews, and he would have led a rich, full life. So he had the St. Andrews connection. He also studied law at Emory. And after his death, his law partner, Francis M. Buster Bird, trying to think of a way to honor the memory his law partner, decided on a student exchange between Emory and St. Andrews. He enlisted the aid of friends in St. Andrews and New York, the money people primarily, and friends in Atlanta, which included Mr. Woodruff and the Coca-Cola money. And so in the first year, there was one student who came to Emory from St. Andrews and one who went from Emory to St. Andrews. Today, there are 4 students going each way. There's a fellow going each way, which simply means they're involved in a graduate program at one of the schools. And there's a fellow going to and from Georgia Tech. Charlie Yates and John Emley, both members of our club, were early contributors and early involved in that student exchange. And I think when I was president of the club, Charlie thought it'd be a good idea if I served on the committee that helped finance the exchange of students. And so for at least 20 years, I've been involved in that program. And each year, the club, among the ways it contributes to the scholarship fund, hosts the scholars at a dinner. And following that dinner, I have conducted a clubhouse tour for the scholars, and maybe in some way it's that clubhouse tour that's the genesis of the meetings today.
Well, and we need to go out into this clubhouse and have you conduct that tour for our viewers. But before we do that, other than participating at the club level in regard to support, are there other ways that viewers or members could possibly participate? How would they do that if they were so inclined?
In the mid-1990s, the club formed a public foundation. It's the Jones Room Foundation. It's important that it's a public foundation because it means that, except for the normal restrictions regarding charitable giving, tax-deductible donations of cash, securities, or memorabilia can be made to the foundation, and we'd certainly welcome that. If part of being public means that if somebody from the general public who's not a member of the club showed up at the front gate and asked to see the Jones Room, we'd invite them in. We'd have somebody accompany them and show them around.
Gee, I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
The last time I checked, part of the record keeping to show that we're a public foundation is that we have a book that visitors can sign in to this room. And a couple of weeks ago I checked, and in the year 2014, we had visitors from 31 states, the District of Columbia, 11 countries, including one member of the royal family of one of those countries. So it's not unusual over the years that we get a wide assortment of people from all over the world.
So you became a member 45 years ago at Atlanta Athletic Club. That was in
1969.
1969. So 2 years later, Bobby Jones passes. A month prior, he sends the letter to the USGA to have them consider bringing the national championship to the new facilities here at Atlanta Athletic Club. What's your memories of all of that?
Well, I remember more about the Open itself in 1976, and I wasn't an insider in the club at that time, so things were happening I knew nothing about. It was an exciting thought that we would host the Open Championship. It rarely came to the South, not to the Southeast anyway.
Yes.
And so it's big for golf and big for Atlanta and big for the Atlanta Athletic Club.
So I know that you want to be able to take us through the clubhouse and bring to life all of the various artifacts and memorabilia. So why don't we have an opportunity to do that?
In advance of the 1976 U.S. Open, we asked Bob Jones if we could display some of his cups and memorabilia, and he said, well, that's fine, but I'd like for you to display it along with the memorabilia of some of my friends, including Charlie Yates and Alexis Sterling and Watts Gunn. So here in this cabinet are some of the cups that Jones won in competitions at the Atlanta Athletic Club. When he was 6 years old, he suffered an ailment that suggested to his family that he should move out into the country. And so they moved out to East Lake, which was at the end of the streetcar line at that time, when young Bobby was 6 years old. And they stayed in a boarding home owned by Mrs. Frank Metter. She arranged a competition with her son and Perry Adair and Alexis Sterling and young Bobby. And Bobby won that competition, and this is the cup that he won at age 6. Maybe the most priceless possession we have, and it's just a little plastic cup. Bobby would go on and say, well, he didn't think he actually won it, they just gave it to him because he was the boy. And in the cabinet, we also have other trophies that he's won. A cap that he won when the Ryder Cup was played at East Lake in 1963. A copy of the letter that he wrote to the USGA asking that the U.S. Open be brought to his home club. And a replica of a trophy that represented the club champion, which Jones won 3 years in a row, and having done so, retired it. The original we donated to the United States Golf Association, and it became the permanent trophy for the U.S. Mid-Amateur Championship. In this cabinet, we had the first championship trophy won by Jones with playing with the big boys. In 1916, he won the Georgia State Amateur Championship as a 14-year-old, and that's his championship trophy. So that's kind of started it, and this one kind of ends it, because that's the ball that he holed out with at Marion to complete the Grand Slam in 1930. It was presented to his good friend Robert Woodruff, who in turn gave it to our club. A couple of things in this cabinet. The photo of Jones in the rain slicker was believed by Jones to be his favorite photograph of himself. And then something that's taken on more of a meaning for us with the movie The King's Speech. In 1930, touring as a part of the Grand Slam year, it was a Walker Cup year, so the Walker Cup team had a practice match at the home of Sir Philip Sassoon. And in that photograph are two members of the royal family who would become kings of England, Edward and Albert. At the entrance to the champions' locker room at Augusta National, there was a bust of Dwight Eisenhower. Clifford Roberts wanted to have a bust of Jones on the opposite side. He knew Jones wouldn't have anything to do with getting measured for the bust, so on the pretext of having him measured for a fedora, the sculptor took the measurements of Jones' head and created the mold from which came the original of this bust. The original now sits opposite the Eisenhower bust at the entrance to the champions' locker room at Augusta. Several years ago, the mold was discovered and several additional copies were made, and we have one of those. Interestingly, the sculptor's name is David Jones, no relation to Bobby. You know, on the 30th anniversary of the Jones Grand Slam, the golf writers presented Jones this globe to commemorate his victory during the Grand Slam years. The globe sat in Bobby Jones' home, and one day when young Bob IV was visiting there, he removed all the flags from the globe, which was no easy task because they're all connected by wire inside the globe. And then when his grandfather got home, he presented the flags to his grandfather. And Bobby said to his grandson, "Son, that's a very thoughtful thing you've done, but the next time you want to do something as a favor for me, why don't you ask your grandmother first?" And this is the Southern Amateur Championship Trophy. We babysit it for the Southern Golf Association, but it was presented by our former president, George Adair, and you'll find the names of many of our club members on the trophy, including Bobby Jones, Charlie Yates, and Watts Gunn. Well, this is the St. Andrews corner. Jones went to St. Andrews first in 1921 as a 19-year-old. Played well for 2 rounds, shot 46 going out in the 3rd round, double bogey the 10th hole, and then at the par 3 11th hole, he failed to get his ball out of the bunker in his first attempt and picked up his ball, thereby disqualifying himself. Some of the historians get it wrong from here because I've heard it said that he tore up his scorecard and walked in. Well, we know from the newspapers that he played out the rest of that round, and because the fourth round was played on the same day, he played the fourth round and shot a 72, which would have been a record score. Some have postulated that had he attempted one more shot and escaped the bunker and two-putted the green, he would have finished second in that tournament. But that act so embarrassed him that it forever changed his on-course demeanor. He was a tempestuous, cursing, club-throwing youth, to the point that the USGA had written him and said if he didn't stop throwing his clubs on the golf course, he wouldn't be invited back to any of their events. He'd go back to St. Andrews in 1926. He would win all of his Walker Cup matches there, and then he would win the Open Championship there in 1927. And then in 1930, he would win the Amateur Championship as a part of the Grand Slam. He was traveling with a group of Atlantans in 1936 on his way to the Olympic Games in Germany, staying at Glen Eagles, and one of his parties said, "We're so close to St. Andrews, we should go and have a round." So they called and booked a time, and as they drove into the town the next day, there was a huge crowd gathered around the first tee, and Jones said there must be a competition going on, not realizing that word had got out. Townspeople had showed up to see him play. Shopkeepers had put signs in their windows, "Bobby's back." And by the time he finished his round, there were more than 5,000 people watching him play. And he did not disappoint, even though he wasn't playing a lot of golf then. He shot 72. He'd go back one last time in 1958 as the honorary captain of the first Eisenhower World Team Amateur Championship. And while there, he was made a freeman of the city of St. Andrews. He didn't realize at first the significance of that award, and when he did realize it, he threw away his prepared remarks and spoke about friends and friendship, and would say that he could take out of his life all of his experiences except those at St. Andrews, and he would have led a rich, full life. The proclamation of the Freeman of the City is copied here, as well as the silver box in which it was presented. I was at St. Andrews several years ago and asked the hall porter at the Royal Ancient Clubhouse if there might be someone around who had a ticket to the presentation ceremony in 1958. And he said, "Well, Mr. Binks Foster comes in every afternoon for tea. You might ask him." I made a point of being there when he arrived, told him we had this cabinet, and asked him if we might have his ticket. And he said, well, he didn't have any better use for it, and we were welcome to it. So here's a copy of just a piece of paper, but to me, a priceless example of what happened in 1958. Jones was a part-time golfer. He only played in 52 tournaments in his life, 31 major championships. He won 13 of them. I call this the family corner. Jones was a hunter and a fisherman, a family man, and a lawyer. But in this cabinet, you do have an example of a golf ball that he won at the U.S. Open at Wingfoot. He only had a couple of things in his office that related to the game of golf. One was a grandfather clock that he won as a part of the Southeastern Open in 1930. And the other was a couplet from the Grantland Rice poem, "When the one great scorer comes to write against your name, he writes not whether you won or lost or how you played the game." The picture shows a golf bag and a golf clubs, but the poem was actually written about the game of football. The Jones grandchildren are members of our club today, and several years ago the granddaughter called and said she had 10 bankers' boxes of stuff. Would we have any interest in it? I said, I'll be right over. So we brought them here, and among the many valuable things in that collection, we found the exchange of correspondence between the Eisenhowers and the Joneses. The main rooms in our clubhouse are named after the places where Jones won the Grand Slam in 1930 and in honor of accomplishments of some of our other members. and we're in the hallway entering the St. Andrews Ballroom. Prior to the 1976 U.S. Open, the Royal Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews presented us this town crest with the Psalter. The lore is that monks fleeing Roman persecution fled to St. Andrews carrying the bones of the Apostle Andrew. To my knowledge, none of the bones have been found, but with DNA testing, who knows what may come yet. Well, down the corridor to the St. Andrews Ballroom, we have a couple of paintings that we commissioned the Atlanta artist Prudence Carter to do. And the one you see here is of the Royal Ancient Clubhouse at St. Andrews. Farther down the hall, you would see one of the Swilcan Bridge. And there are photographs of the presentation ceremonies of the 5 championship trophies that Jones won in 1930, and as well the Walker Cup. At the far end of the hall, there's a painting of Jones holding the British Amateur Trophy. Well, we're in the Hoylake room where Jones won the British Open in 1930. And the painting behind me is another one done by the Atlanta artist Prudence Carter. It was done from several photographs taken in a 1980 trip commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Grand Slam. So the clubhouse has changed somewhat since this was done, but our head golf professional at the time took a photo of this painting with him on a trip over there, and they thought they were looking at the actual clubhouse, a photo of the clubhouse rather than a photo of the painting of the clubhouse. At the far end of the room, there's a painting of Jones. He's shown seated in a chair, but at the time, the illness was underway and he was actually in a wheelchair. He's probably somewhere in his late 50s at the time of that painting. On the opposite wall, one of the customs in the United Kingdom is that the captain of the club during public occasions would wear a red jacket. And this happens to be the red jacket worn by the captain of the Royal Liverpool Golf Club when he presented the championship trophy to Bob Jones in 1930. When Jones would go to St. Andrews, he would have the well-known local club maker, Tom Stewart, make the iron heads for him, and he would bring them back to Atlanta, and as he needed to have them done so, he would have them shafted. Jones gave a set of those to his friend Watts Gunn, and Watts eventually gave them to us. And for the 1976 U.S. Open, we had the longtime honorary professional at St. Andrews, Laurie Octoloni, shaft them for us. So in this cabinet, you've got iron heads made by Tom Stewart for Bob Jones and shafts that were inserted by Laurie Octoloni. Well, we were in the Oakmont room. When we asked Watts Gunn what his favorite tournament was, he said it was one that he lost. The only time 2 members of the same club competed in the finals of the U.S. Amateur, Watts was beaten by fellow club member Bob Jones. So memorabilia in this room is worth looking at, but the photograph that's to my right here shows the 1926 Walker Cup team, including Guilford, Francis Ouimet, Watts Gunn, Bob Jones. Gunn won all of his Walker Cup matches. Well, this is the Tommy Barnes room, one of 7 golfing brothers, winner of several Georgia State Amateur Championships, played in 16 consecutive U.S. Amateur Championships, won a handful of Dogwood Invitational Championships, and then at the age of 73, broke the course record at East Lake, playing from the back tees. The record previously held by Bob Jones was 63. Tommy Barnes shot 62 at the age of 73. One of the interesting things to me is that during that month, he played almost every day and never scored higher than the 60s. Jones began his competitive career as a 14-year-old at the Marion Cricket Club outside Philadelphia. Scored well in the qualifying rounds, won his first 2 matches, and then in the 3rd match was beaten by the eventual champion. He'd go back to Marion in 1924 and win the U.S. Amateur Championship there. And these are golf clubs that he used during that tournament. Then he would go back in 1930 and complete the Grand Slam by winning the amateur. For reasons I haven't fully understood, Marion doesn't have flags on its golf holes. It has a wicker basket, and we have a copy of a wicker basket presented by Marion to us on the occasion of the 1976 U.S. Open. Charlie Yates won the British Amateur Championship at 1938 in Troon in Scotland, and his championship medal is in this cabinet. He also received the Bob Jones Award, the highest award given by the United States Golf Association. And in this cabinet are some of the memorabilia from his Walker Cup years. 1938 was a Walker Cup year, and the matches were played that year at St. Andrews, so not too far away from Troon. Some of the people in the UK had said, well, Yates won the amateur championship, but he hadn't beaten the best player in the UK who wasn't there. Turns out that he drew that player in the first match in the Walker Cup and beat him soundly. And then when the Walker Cup matches were completed, they asked Charlie to give some remarks as the amateur champion, and he wasn't prepared to do so. Happened that there was a group of bagpipers walking up the street playing A Wee Dock and Doris, and he said, they don't want to hear any speeches, let's all sing A Wee Dock and Doris. So on the eve of the final match at Troon, Charlie received this cable from Bob Jones, wishing him well. The original of the cable was presented by Charlie to Troon on the occasion of the celebration of its 100th birthday. So this is a copy of that cable. Well, the Atlanta Athletic Club was organized in 1898 as an athletic club. Originally, that meant racket sports, tennis, a little bit of everything else. And so this is our Hall of Fame recognizing accomplishments of our members, including tennis players, handball players, track and field. Our basketball and baseball teams regularly beat the local university teams. So there are swimmers here, there are sports writers, a little bit of an assortment of everybody, but it includes the Bob Jones and Charlie Yates and Alexa Sterling and Watts Gunn as well. Our member Dot Kirby was favored to win the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship when it was played at East Lake in 1950. She didn't win that year, but she won the next year in 1951, and her championship medal is in this cabinet. We had our centennial celebration in 1998, a year-long celebration including many parties, and in this room we have gifts presented to us by prominent American clubs and clubs from overseas. Included among them is a portrait of Dr. Frank Stapleford, after whom the points system of scoring was named, and that portrait was presented to us by the Wallasey Golf Club. In preparation for the U.S. Amateur in 2014, someone thought it'd be a good idea to see how many of our club members participated in various golf organizations, especially those related to amateur golf. And to our amazement, we found that many of our members had participated, worn many hats, and their names are on the various boards on this wall, starting with the fact that 5 of our members served on the executive committee of the United States Golf Association. And when we asked Bob Jones if we might have some of his memorabilia, he said, well, that would be fine as long as we honored his friends as well. One of those was Alexa Sterling. A painting of her is on the wall here. I'm fond of saying that in spite of the accomplishments of Bob Jones, Watts Gunn, Charlie Yates, Charlie Harrison, Tommy Barnes, and others, our first champion was a lady golfer. Alexa Sterling won 3 U.S. Women's Amateur Championships in a row in 1916, 1919, and 1920, there being no competitions during the war years. We're in the Hall of Champions, which at our present location started with the 1976 U.S. Open Championship won by Jerry Paint. And up and down the halls, you'll see photographs and scorecards and pictures and player thank yous. Following the 1976 U.S. Open, we hosted the 1981 PGA Championship, the 1982 Junior World Cup, won by the Spanish team that included Jose Maria Olazabal, the 1984 Mid-Amateur Championship. This was the third time the U.S. Mid-Amateur Championship was played, and the permanent trophy was donated to the United States Golf Association by the Atlanta Athletic Club. We then followed with the 1990 U.S. Women's Open, played on our Riverside course and won by Betsy King. We had the 1995 Georgia State Amateur Championship on our Riverside course, the 2001 PGA Championship won by David Toms, the 2002 U.S. Boys Amateur Championship, the 2011 PGA Championship, and then recently the 2014 U.S. Amateur Championship. We're looking at a replica of the Wanamaker Trophy won most recently by Keegan Bradley. And this is part of the Atlanta Athletic Club's commitment to the game of golf, to its history and to its traditions. Our first three golf professionals came from Carnoustie, Scotland. Alex Smith, who won 2 of our U.S. Open championships, his brother-in-law, Jimmy Maiden, and then Jimmy's brother, Stuart Maiden, after whom Bobby Jones and Alexa Sturley copied their golf swings. Bobby Jones met George Sargent when he was the head golf professional at Scioto Country Club and asked him to come be our head golf professional in 1932. Sargent grew up outside London at Epsom Downs, studied at Ganton under Harry Varden, immigrated through Canada to the U.S., and won our 1909 U.S. Open Championship. And his Open Championship medal is in this cabinet. Sargent was a founding member of the American PGA, served as its 3rd president, and his son Harold later served as president of the American PGA. And son Jack was in the chairs to follow in those footsteps before his untimely death. So we've named our golf shop the Sargent Golf Shop, and some of the memorabilia is there. Both of the Sargents were well-known, well-respected rules officials at the Masters Golf Tournament. We're good copycats at the Atlanta Athletic Club. It's the custom in many of the UK clubs for each of their captains or presidents to have a ball placed on a silver-plated golf club, and then on occasions of state, and then once a year somebody will walk down the public street in a parade. In our case, we've got silver-plated golf clubs with balls representing each of our presidents, and the gold-plated ball representing Bobby Jones. This is our Hall of Presidents. Bob Jones served as president of this club, as did his father, and their portraits are on this wall as well. Well, the Atlanta Athletic Club was organized as an athletic club. It seems only appropriate that we had an athletic director, and our first athletic director was John Heisman, after whom the Heisman Trophy was named. His portrait and contract are on the wall here. He was paid the pricely sum of $75 a month, and he did double duty as the athletic director at Georgia Tech, where he coached the football teams, and some give him credit for inventing the forward pass, and he was on the original committee that generated the rules for the game of football. In 1930, Jones won the U.S. Open at Interlaken. During one of the rounds on the 9th hole, a baby cried out in Jones' backswing, and he topped his shot, and it skipped across the water, landing safely on the other side. Local members have said that the ball skipped on top of a lily pad. So whether that is true or not, this photograph from Interlaken Country Club represents the lily pad shot.
If you'd like more information, ask reception for the Clubhouse Exhibit Tour brochure. Atlanta Athletic Club. History happens here.